Every day where the little engines work, the crisp air is suddenly filled with a familiar noise. The lakes and mountains have many visitors, and Harold the helicopter flies the sky making sure that no one is in trouble. All present and correct. Time to return to base. Then Harold noticed something. A sturdy diesel was coming round the mountainside. Harold flew lower for a closer inspection. I'm Harold. Who are you? I'm Rusty, replied the diesel. Don't recall seeing you before. What brings you this way? The Fat Controller sent me to help the other engines, huffed Rusty. This was no time for a chat with a helicopter. Well done. Cheers and keep up the good work. Cheeky chopper, muttered Rusty. Not long now, encouraged the driver. We'll soon be at the top station. Peter, Sam and Sir Handel were glad to see Rusty. Even so, Sir Handel wouldn't stop grumbling. The trucks didn't like Sir Handel and wanted to play tricks on him. No one understands our feelings, sympathised Gordon. Now, if you were ill, you couldn't shun trucks, could you? Good idea, replied Sir Handel. I'll try it. He did so next morning. I don't feel well, he groaned. There wasn't time to examine him, so some of his trucks were coupled behind Peter Sam's coaches. Rusty promised to follow with the rest. Peter Sam didn't mind the extra work. He left his coaches at the station and trundled cheerfully on. Soon, they reached the quarry where the trucks were needed. Empty trucks at the bottom of the slope are hitched to a steel rope. Loaded ones at the top are hitched to another. By their weight, loaded trucks run down the steep slope, pulling the empty ones up. Peter Sam duly waited at the bottom of the slope for the loaded trucks. He never bumped trucks unless they misbehaved, but the loaded trucks couldn't see him properly. They thought he was Sir Handel. The chance for trickery had come. Faster! Faster, they yelled. No, no, wailed the empty trucks. It's Peter Sam. But it was no use. Hurrah, hurrah, roared the trucks. Peter Sam shut his eyes. Beep, beep, wailed Peter Sam. Rusty was working nearby and came to help clear up the mess. Bust my buffers, exclaimed Rusty. Never mind, Peter Sam, we'll get you out. Peter Sam felt battered. His funnel was cracked and his boiler dented. Thank you, Rusty, he sighed and limped slowly home. I'm sorry about your accident, said Sir Handel. I always stand well back. Trucks don't like me. Why didn't you warn me? I didn't think. You never do. You can start thinking now while you're doing Peter Sam's work as well as your own. That'll teach you to pretend you are ill. Sir Handel did start thinking about Gordon. Skarloey had been to the works to be mended. He felt much better. Rusty the Diesel was helping him off his truck. Skarloey hadn't met the little diesel before. Rusty seems a kindly sort of engine, he thought to himself. I help to mend the line and do odd jobs, explained Rusty. I hear everyone is looking forward to seeing you again. Come on. Peter Sam was feeling depressed. He was still getting over his accident, but he wanted to start work again. The Fat Controller wouldn't let him. Another day's rest will do you good, he said. Besides, I've got a surprise for you. For me, sir? How nice, sir. What is it, sir? Wait and see. The surprise was Skarloey. "Oh," said Peter Sam, "I'm glad you've come home." They lit Skarloey's fire and he sizzled happily. "I feel all excited," he said, "just like a young engine. Now, tell me all the news." "I see you've met Rusty," said Peter Sam. "Yes, I like that diesel." "So do I," replied Peter Sam. "It's a pity Duncan doesn't." "Who is Duncan?" "He came as a spare engine after my accident," replied Peter Sam. "Is he useful?" "He keeps busy and I'm sure he means well, but he's bouncy and rude. He sings and sways and swivels around. His driver calls it rock and roll." "I understand," said Skarloey gravely. His driver interrupted. "Duncan has done it again. He's stuck in a tunnel. Come on, old boy, we'll have to get him out." Skarloey was pleased. He wanted to run and looked forward to meeting Duncan. They found the guard's van and some workmen and hurried up the line. "How nice and smooth the rails are," thought Skarloey. "They've mended all the old bumps. The little diesel helped do that. What a difference Rusty's made to the line." Quite soon they found Duncan. He was stuck at the far end of the tunnel, and he was very cross. "I'm a plain blunt engine, as speak as I find. Tunnels should be tunnels and not rabbit holes. This railway is no good at all." "Don't be silly," snapped his driver. "This tunnel is quite big enough for engines who don't rock and roll." At last, Skarloey was able to push Duncan and his coaches safely through. The guard's van was left on the siding, and the workmen stayed to make sure everything was safe. Duncan grumbled all the way home, but Skarloey paid no attention. Later, the fat controller spoke severely to Duncan. "Listen to me. There is nothing wrong with that tunnel. You stuck in it because you tried to do rock and roll. Tunnels are not dance floors, and you are not a pop star." The fat controller gave his full attention to Duncan's funnel. "If it happens again," he ended ominously, "I shall find ways to cut you down to size. In other words, your career is on the line. Need I say more?" Duncan thought the fat controller had said quite enough, and he remained completely silent and still for at least a whole evening. Skarloey, the little engine, loves all the sights and sounds along his line and knows them very well. One morning, soon after he returned from being mended, he was enjoying his journey more than ever before. Along the way, he met Rusty. "You know," he said, "if I couldn't see these familiar faces and places, I'd think I was on a different railway. You've done wonders with these rails." Rusty laughed. "I'm glad you're pleased. Manager said let's mend the track so well he won't know where he is. And we did. And you didn't, if you take my meaning." Skarloey liked this hard-working diesel. "There's still one bad bit," warned Rusty. "Just before the first station, an engine might come off there, particularly Duncan. He will rock and roll along the line. Look at him right now. I shouldn't like his passengers hurt." "Quit about me. I'm a plain-speaking engine and I believe in plain speaking. Speak up." Rusty warned Duncan about the bad bit of line. "Huh," grunted Duncan. "I know my way about. I don't need smelly diesels to tell me what to do." Rusty felt hurt. Duncan banged about the yard. Then he clattered crossly to the station. James was already there, waiting for him. "You're late," he snapped. "Ah, no," said Duncan. "It's that smelly diesel's fault. Rusty tries to teach me how to stay on the rails and then goes off leaving me to find my own coaches." "You poor engine," sympathised James. "I know all about diesels. One crept into our yard and ordered us about. I soon sent him packing." Duncan was filled with admiration. He didn't know that James was boastful and sometimes didn't tell the truth. "Send Rusty packing, send Rusty packing," snorted Duncan. He climbed the hill furiously. "Well done, boy. Keep it up," encouraged his driver. Soon they were near the first station. Duncan was pleased. Nothing's happened, silly old diesel. Clever me." And he rocked and he rolled along the line. "Steady, boy," checked his driver, but it was too late. "Sleepers and ballast. I'm off." And he was. "I warned him," said Rusty, "but all he did was call me names." The little diesel refused to move. "I'm ashamed of you, Rusty," said Skarloey. "Think of the passengers. What are they going to do?" "Oh, I'd forgotten them. Yes, of course. We must help the passengers." And Rusty roared into life. Duncan stood sad and solitary. He couldn't rock and roll now. "Oh, dear," he thought. "Everyone will know how silly I am." The passengers had to get out and help too. They weren't very pleased about that, but worked as hard as they could. They carefully levered Duncan back onto the line. After that, Duncan was extra careful all day. At last, evening came. "Rusty," he whispered, "thank you for helping. I'm sorry I was rude to you." "That's all right, Duncan. I wish all diesels were like you. Let's be friends." "Suits me," replied Rusty. "We'll mend that bad bit of rail first thing tomorrow."
One day the owner brought some people to see the railway. He showed them everything. They travelled in the trains and looked at stations and bridges and coaches. "Yes," they would say thoughtfully, "we'll take this," or "No, we won't take that." Peter Sam whispered to Sir Handel, "Men came and did that on our old line, and then," said Sir Handel, "soon afterwards it was sold," finished Peter Sam mournfully. Peter Sam wanted to cry. The other engines were sad too. "What's the matter with you all?" his driver asked him one day. "We don't want to be sold," said Peter Sam miserably. "Sold?" the driver was surprised. "Who to?" "To those people who came and talked about taking things." "You silly little engine," laughed his driver. "They're not going to buy us. They're going to take our pictures on television." And he tried to explain what that meant. "Not going to be sold, not going to be sold," sang Peter Sam. He could hardly wait to tell the others. He told them about the television as well, and they were pleased and excited too. All except Sir Handel. "I don't hold with it," he grumbled. "Vulgar, I call it. Fancy traipsing about making an exhibition of yourselves. I won't do it, I tell you. Telly something indeed. Just let the Fat Controller come here, I'll tell him something." The next day, when the Fat Controller did come to explain about the television, Sir Handel kept strangely quiet. "Now," said the Fat Controller at last, "I want every engine to take part." "I don't feel well," quavered Sir Handel. "You poor engine," said the Fat Controller gravely. "You can stay in the shed." Sir Handel smiled broadly. "And your driver and fireman shall take you to pieces. That will make a very interesting picture. Just what we need." Sir Handel's feelings were beyond words. "Duncan shall have a goods train, while Rusty and the men can show how we mend the line." "Please, sir, what about me, sir?" asked Peter Sam anxiously. The Fat Controller smiled. "You, Peter Sam, shall pull the special television train." "Oh, sir," bubbled Peter Sam in ecstasy. The television men built towers for cameras beside the line. Everyone practiced hard till they knew just what they had to do. At last the time came and the announcer gave the signal. "We're on the air! We're on the air!" chanted Peter Sam. The Fat Controller smiled. "We arranged for television," he said, "to let everyone see our little old engine. We are proud of him. 3 cheers for Scar Lowy." Scar Lowy smiled. "Thank you, sir, and all for your nice surprise. Now I'll surprise you. Listen, when I was mended in England, I found my twin, called Talilin. When the workmen saw us together, they laughed and called us their little old twins. Talilin told me about his railway. It's a lovely one, in Wales. Please go to see him, all of you, and wish him dry rails and good running from Scar Lowy, his little old twin."